First time?
Between 2008 and 2020, Hamilton Academical endured what was arguably their modern golden era, as they spent a large part of this period in the top flight, enduring their longest run in the division since before World War II. A club that seemed to defy relegation despite their modest size, it could be argued that at the time, they were an example of how to run a small club in the top flight and be competitive. Since 2020, however, the club has been a complete basket case, seeing 3 relegations, a Challenge Cup win, and now a 15-point deduction for not paying players and for failing to acquire a bronze licence, which is a minimum needed to be an SPFL member. So, in this video, I'll be looking at the last 5 years to try and understand how this club has gone from Premiership regulars to taking Inverness's mantle as the most mental club in the SPFL. Hamilton Academical were founded in 1874 by staff and pupils of Hamilton Academy, meaning they hold the distinction of being the only professional club in Britain named after a school. The club would join the Scottish Football League in 1897 following Renton's resignation, where they would spend the next 10 seasons in the second division. They would get promoted to the first division at the end of the 1905-06 season as one of the 2 teams promoted due to the expansion of the first division, even though they finished 4th, with the other promoted team, Clyde, finishing 2nd? Why is early Scottish football like this? Anyway, Accies would remain in the first division until World War II, where in that time they would reach the Scottish Cup final twice, along with 3 further appearances in the semi-final. Their first final in 1911 saw them lose 2-0 to Celtic after a replay, and in 1935 they would be defeated 2-1 by Rangers. The first post-war season, however, would see Accies finish bottom, and they would spend 6 seasons in Division B, where, upon their return to the top flight, they would finish bottom once again. They would then spend 11 seasons in Division 2. During this time, they temporarily resigned from the Football League due to financial issues, including a failed merger with Clyde, before once again they would return to the top flight and finish bottom. It would be another 20 years before Accies would return to the top flight, where in the 1985-86 season, they would win the first division to earn promotion to the Premier Division. They finished bottom, and would then win the first division again, and then get relegated, but not by finishing bottom this time. They finished 10th. Whilst the early 90s would see the club win back-to-back Challenge Cups, more hardship for Accies would come in the second half of the decade. In 1994, Douglas Park would be sold to Sainsbury's, and the club would ground share for 7 years, playing at Albion Rovers Cliftonville in Coatbridge and Partick Thistle's Fir Hill in Glasgow. During this time, the club would get relegated to the second division, where they would immediately get promoted, but then back-to-back relegations to see in the new millennium saw the club drop to the third division, the 4th tier of Scottish football. The second of these relegations came about due to a 15-point deduction as players went on strike against Stenhousemuir. Seeing the game postponed, Accies made to pay £2,000 to Stenhousemuir, and with the 15-point deduction, they would be relegated by 5 points, whereas beforehand they were sitting in 6th. Accies would win the third division at the first attempt, and the following season would move into New Douglas Park, which was built behind the Sainsbury's that sits where the original ground was. They would spend another 3 seasons in the second division before being promoted, but at the end of the 2007-08 season, they would win the first division, seeing them return to the top flight after 20 years. Their first season would see them finish in 9th, followed by a 7th place finish, and were looking like they would consolidate themselves as a mid-table side. They proceeded to finish bottom. They would finish 4th and 5th upon their return to the first division before beating Hibs in the 2013-14 playoffs to return to the Premiership, even though they missed out on the Championship title to Dundee on the final day despite a 10-2 win over Greenock Morton. They would once again finish 7th upon their return, but the following seasons would see Accies become a cockroach at the bottom end of the table, finishing 10th, then 11th, beating Dundee United in the playoffs, back-to-back 10th place finishes, and then another 11th place finish, but no playoffs due to the COVID pandemic ending the season early. During this second stint in the Premiership, Accies would be involved in a Nigerian print scam. Yes, the scam that is designed to take advantage of grannies managed to scam a top-flight football club. In October 2017, fraudsters pretending to be investigators from Royal Bank of Scotland convinced a club accountant that there was a risk of corruption and that money should be moved immediately, providing instructions that would bypass the bank's security. The fraudsters would get away with almost £1 million, which saw the club lose a large chunk of its bank balance and force the abandonment of youth academy improvements. In February 2018, the club announced they were prepared to take legal action against RBS due to the lacking security measures, and during discussions with the bank, Colin McGowan, the club's chief executive, called the bank morally bankrupt over the fact the bank would not be looking at placing a system to allow customers to place a daily limit on transferring money between accounts. The COVID season is where things would start to really unravel for Accies though, as the club would be relegated from the Premiership. Accies would endure a tough start to life in the Championship, finding themselves in a relegation battle, but would pull away from the bottom two clubs towards the end of the season. June 2022 is where things start to go terribly wrong for them, as they would hire John Rankin as their new manager. In the League Cup, Accies would finish second in their group but failed to reach the second round. The league campaign, however, was terrible. After the first 9 games, the club had only 2 wins and were sitting in 9th, and by November were sitting bottom. There would be a run of good form in January and February, whilst March would see the club win the Challenge Cup after beating Raith Rovers in a game I have no idea how they won. Yes, I am still better. Accies, however, would only get 3 points in their final 9 games, including a 7-0 loss to Dundee, to see them finish 9th, only ahead of Cove on goal difference. Whilst Accies would overcome Alloa in the playoff semi-final, they would be defeated by Airdrie on penalties, seeing the club relegated to the 3rd tier for the first time since 2004. Despite this, the board decided to give Rankin a 3-year contract extension because, as we'll get into later, they seem like a bunch of totally sane-minded individuals. This season was a season of expectation for Hamilton, as they would be considered joint favourites for the title with Falkirk, so a minimum expectation of a title battle was there. After 4 games, the club were top of the league and were keeping in touch with Falkirk until about December. A poor run from December to February, along with Falkirk being utterly dominant, saw Accies finish second and 16 points behind. They would once again dispatch of Alloa in the semi-finals before they would beat Duncan Ferguson's Inverness to earn promotion. It's this most recent season, however, where things have gone really, really wrong. First, we have the issues with kits. Due to general board incompetence, deals with your typical kit manufacturers such as Adidas, Nike, Puma, Joma, etc. weren't able to be agreed. This meant that for the League Cup group stages, the club used last season's kit before eventually releasing this monstrosity. Now, this season is Hamilton's 150th anniversary, so you thought they would choose a decent kit design, but also, who on earth is Kurt? Well, Kurt is owned by Serif Zengen, and the only club they have done a kit for so far is Accies. The reason? Well, Serif Zengen is the owner of Hamilton Accies. It should also be pointed out that they never released the away kit until the 3rd game of the season, which, again, is a monstrosity, and their 3rd kit, which was voted on by fans, didn't see release until November. You also couldn't buy any of these shirts until the end of September. There is also no front of shirt sponsor, one of the most important ways a club actually makes money, due to Zengen knocking back countless offers for sponsorship. The first real issues in regards to behind the scenes issues, however, came out on the 1st of August, when it was revealed that players had walked out of training over not getting paid. This coming after Accies made fun of clubs on Twitter over the fact they had signed Nikolai Todorov.
300, 305, 310, 315, 320, 325, 330, 340, 350, 360, 375, 395. I'm done. 395 and a lighter, it's a Calibra refillable. 400!
Smashing!
Get it round here. Get it right round here. Skinny. I wanted that.
I should point out that after 29 games, Todorov has 1 goal in the championship, which came in his 29th game. Anyway, the squad had not received their wages for July, which Accies claimed was down to a global banking outage, which seemingly only affected them. Another financial issue would arise when it came to hospitality, where it is believed that they haven't been paying the catering company, despite the fact that you can get season tickets for hospitality. This has meant that they have reportedly resorted to phoning in Indian takeaways. They've just made like a glorified gaff for hospitality, haven't they? On the pitch, meanwhile, things were not good to say the least. Accies have been one of the worst teams in the league this season, and were always stuck at the bottom of the table, propped up by Airdrie having a Brecon-esque start to their campaign. The Cups weren't going much better either. Knocked out at the League Cup group stage following penalty losses to Rafe and Stirling, the Challenge Cup saw them knocked out by Morton, and in the Scottish Cup, they were almost taken to extra time by Musselburgh Athletic, who play in the East of Scotland Premier Division, before being knocked out in the following round by St Johnstone. Because of these results and performances, fans were not happy with John Rankin, and this has been the case in League One. The board didn't see a problem with things, however, with Jerry Strain, the director of football at Hamilton, saying, "John has got a 44.5% win percentage rate. He's won the Challenge Cup, and he got us promotion to the Championship at the first time of asking." So, about that 45.5% win rate, see if you isolate it to the 2 seasons he has had so far in the Championship, where most games are played and is the level Accies are wanting to stay at, that rate plummets to 24.6%, which isn't very good. In this same interview, Strain mentioned some of the financial difficulties in building a competitive squad, claiming, "We have had to walk away from 6 permanent transfers, 5 in the summer and 1 in January, as we cannot at this stage compete with some of the money being spent or being offered by clubs in our league, with significantly higher fan bases and larger commercial incomes." Now he is saying this when Accies have a first team squad of 26 players, and this is after 6 players departed in the January transfer window, including their captain Scott Martin, who left for Partick Thistle on deadline day. And there have been points where it seems like they had 35 players. Seeing as there were so many complaints about how the board was running the club, it was decided that a fan forum would be held to allow their concerns to be heard in a controlled manner. The club would cancel this, stating, "We regret that in view of important developments pertaining to stadium acquisition, it is necessary to postpone the fans forum." They still haven't rescheduled it. Jock Brown, who is the chairman, later put out a statement adding, "We are currently in the midst of a complex, delicate period of transition, which includes the acquisition of the stadium. The plans involved for when this takeover of the ground happens includes building a brand new hotel and an international academy targeting North America and the Middle East." Hold on, Keta Makwara isn't involved in this, is he? This stadium deal seemingly hit problems somewhere along the road, as on the 3rd of April, fellow tenants Clyde put out a statement. In it, they talk about how the club signed a deal with Hamilton to allow them to move in following their departure from Broadwood. As part of this deal, Clyde would stay for up to 5 seasons, but after 3 seasons had the right to leave if they chose to do so. In February, they notified Hamilton they were planning on staying, but they didn't hear anything back from them. Well, on the 28th of March, the SFA unveiled their list of clubs that had an SFA licence. Having a licence allows you to compete in SFA competitions such as the Scottish Cup and Tier 5 leagues, but to be in the SPFL, you are required to have a bronze licence. Going through the list, you can see the categories and what levels all these clubs are at. 3 clubs in the SPFL on this list, however, had an entry licence. Dumbarton and Inverness were docked due to being in administration, something which they both have since exited, so expect that to be upgraded fairly soon. And Hamilton due to failing in the first team criteria. So what is in the first team criteria? Basically, it's to do with training facilities, medical facilities and coaching staff. In that previous statement by Jock Brown, Jerry Strange speaks regarding first team matters, where he mentions, "Off of the field, we will have a new head of medical in place next week as Caitlin Wright makes a move to St Johnstone, where she looks to further advance her career. I also plan to be recruiting additional staff to the club across our medical and football departments over the next few months as we look to continue our growth and develop internally, ultimately to benefit the end product on the field of play on match day." Has Jerry not hired medical staff? Or is it the coaching section that they have failed, with John Ranking seemingly not being a very good coach? Either way, not having a bronze licence in place meant they would be punished at some point during the coming weeks. Bonnie Rigg had been given a 6-point deduction earlier in the season after they had their licence stripped over the quality of their pitch. So, with this threat looming over them, Accies seemingly remembered how to play football again, gaining a vital 1-0 win over Neil Lennon's Dunfermline and a 2-1 win over Partick Thistle. This was coming at a time when Airdrie were making a charge towards them and Dunfermline, and with Queen's Park dropping off a cliff, it seemed that these 2 wins could be all that was needed to keep them off the bottom at least. Well, on the 17th of April, the SPFL put out a statement regarding their points deduction, and to everyone's surprise, they weren't deducted 6 points. They were deducted 15 points instead.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that? What is that, Private Pile?
This was down to 4 separate charges with differing punishments. Charge 1 was down to the club not telling the SPFL they had failed to pay 6 players, then lying about it to get out of a transfer embargo. This saw a punishment of 12 points deducted and a £5,000 fine. Charge 2 was in regards to incorrect information regarding stadium ownership. Punishment for this is a £3,000 fine, of which £1,500 is suspended. Charge 3 was down to the downgrading of their licence to an entry level. Punishment for that was 3 points deducted. And Charge 4 was down to the late submission of next season's membership criteria, which saw the club given a £1,000 suspended fine. This means that with 3 games left, Accies were dropped to bottom of the table, 8 points behind Airdrie, effectively relegating them. Something that would be confirmed following a 0-0 draw with fellow strugglers Queen's Park. So this season, we have seen players fail to get paid, kits turning up late and being made by the owner's brand new company, a terrible manager being kept in charge seemingly out of spite, hospitality being reduced to a glorified gaff, fans being treated with contempt and even getting banned from the ground over their concerns with how the club is run, a split happening with there being 2 social media accounts attempting to provide information on the club's ongoings, season tickets going from your typical plastic cards to being made out of cardboard by the looks of things, the board more interested in squeezing money out of hotels and the academy, and now this 15 points deduction. It is obvious then that Accies are very much in trouble going into next season. Their most recent set of accounts shows that in their last season in the Championship before relegation, the club made a loss of almost £1 million. So, who is behind this massive mess we are seeing? Well, when it comes to the stadium, it is owned by Colin McGowan, who is the former owner of Hamilton Accies. When Serif Zengen bought the club in 2023, McGowan made sure he kept ownership of the ground, due to the fact he runs a bunch of charities from the stadium buildings. Now, it should be pointed out that McGowan wasn't popular during his time at Accies despite some of the success on the field, but he did also claim that he was the victim of hate crimes over the criticisms he was getting. I also want to add that he used to be a part of the Reef Rovers board that allowed Claude Anelka to take charge back in 2004, so on that basis alone, he should not be involved in football. At all, or like any business whatsoever. Serif Zengen, meanwhile, is a Turkish businessman whose main company listed on his LinkedIn page is ZL Group, which specialises in freight logistics and have capital and reserves of £10,000. Thankfully, he has 3 other companies with combined capital and reserves of about £1 million, but how much of that is actually going towards the football club? Even then, how much money is actually going into the club just in general? Remember, that £1 million loss I mentioned earlier was from the Championship. They have been in League One since, and with issues this season with paying players, there is a serious concern that Accies could be in a situation where administration will hit the club. There were rumours back in February that administration was imminent. In fact, it's now come out that Accies haven't been paying their rent. In those accounts showing they lost nearly £1 million, it said they owed £272,000 to HAFC Stadium Limited, the company that owns the stadium and is run by Colin McGowan, and it is believed they once again went a year without paying. This means there is a chance that Accies might not even be playing at New Douglas Park next season, and who knows where they could end up ground sharing, especially when you consider that Clyde are also tenants, which really limits the options available to both clubs. Unless Clyde have been paying their rent, in which case could we see Accies at Broadwood in like a weird stadium swap thing? Jerry Strain, meanwhile, who is a director of football despite seemingly having no prior experience of said role, is also involved in the world of business. His most recent appointment was at a company called Document Solutions, who have just been liquidated with £500,000 worth of debt. The rest of his listings on Companies House involve one company with an active strike-off plan, 3 more dissolved companies, and DS Environmental Logistics, who currently have £2,000 in capital and reserves, and last year had a compulsory strike discontinued, meaning they just about survived being dissolved. And then there are some of the sponsors they do get. Usually these are just local businesses or those associated with board members, but some of them are a bit dodgy to say the least. Nero Vodka are based out of Steps, which isn't too far from Hamilton, and many clubs have official alcohol partnerships. Nero Vodka, however, has links to the Kinahan family, an organised crime family who have arrest warrants in the United States with rewards up to $5 million for those at the top end. So if I suddenly stop making videos, then we know what has happened here.
Hi. How can I help you?
You then have stadium sponsors ZLX. ZLX is a research and development firm who tried suing a client for not putting down the installation of a fridge as an R&D tax claim. They have recently changed their name to Tax Tech in an attempt to distance themselves from some of the shenanigans they were involved in, but it looks like it is still the same people involved. Accies, since getting that point deduction, have put out 2 statements. One saying they were awaiting the written reasons for the points deduction, even though they were in the SPFL statement, and a second statement pointing out they will be taking the SPFL to a tribunal to appeal the points deduction. In both statements, they call upon fans to back the players, the management and the board in these difficult times, which, considering everything I have covered, is not going to happen. With Jenkins' takeover being relatively recent, and Colin McGowan now being involved in the running down of 2 clubs, it does make you wonder when the SFA and the SPFL will start doing fit and proper tests when it comes to club ownership, because it shouldn't take a club potentially going under to act as a wake-up call for how many dodgy owners there are looking to get a hand on clubs in this country. That's all for this video, and I hope you enjoyed. Was there anything that I missed? Especially if you're an Accies fan, then let me know. What do you think will happen to Accies in the coming months? I have a feeling we might have a replacement for the Inverness series coming soon. Either way, let us know in the comments below. Of course, liking, sharing and subscribing are all appreciated, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.